Now come to the next one is the trachea. That trachea is 10 to 12 centimeter long tube, right, and it is covered with the cartilaginous ring. It is covered with the cartilaginous ring, and these cartilaginous rings are called the tracheal rings. These are called the tracheal rings. Why it is called the cartilaginous rings? Because these rings are made up of the cartilages, right? These rings are made up of the cartilages. And what kind of cartilage? That is the hyaline cartilage. It is the question of pre-medical, right? Hyaline cartilage. That hyaline cartilage is incomplete C-shaped cartilage, right? It is incomplete C-shaped cartilage. C-shaped cartilage. Structure is incomplete, right? There are number of questions which is asked on the hyaline cartilage, right? It is C-shaped, incomplete, and now what will happen here? Its matrix is, hyaline cartilage matrix is glass-like translucent, right? It is glass-like translucent and apparently fiberless. It is glass-like translucent and apparently fiberless, and it is the most abundant cartilage which is found in the embryonic stage, right? Most abundant cartilage present in embryonic stage, right? Other than the tracheal rings, it is present in the larynx as well, right? The nasal septum, that nasal septum is made up of the incomplete C-shaped cartilage. Clear? So all these things, these are the examples of the hyaline cartilage, right? When we talk about our nasal passage, actually it starts from here now, right? So this is the external nostrils when it opens into the nasal chamber, and this is the nasal septa, right? And that nasal septum is made up of here it is made up of the cartilage, and upper part is made up of the bone. This is called the nasal bone, and from posterior side bone is called the vomer, right, which forms the nasal passage, right? And one more thing, actually when you feel keep your hand like that, right? Push like the pressure, and here pressure like upper side, right? You are feeling some pain like structure. Actually these growth of the nasal bone, these are called the inferior turbinals or the concha, nasal concha, right? They are called the nasal concha or the nasal conches. These are the spiral, actually that passage is the spiral which helps to make the moisture of the air. It maintains the temperature and makes the temperature of the atmospheric air equal to the body temperature, right? Clear? So this is the part of the, or we can say this is the function of the concha, nasal concha or the turbinal bones, right? Nasal passage is made up of three types of bones: the maxilla, right, that is the upper jaw bone, the vomer, and the ethmoid, right? So in that manner, that nasal passage works on it, right? Even That's why we told that hyaline cartilage is present in that the nasal septum, right? Which is incomplete C-shaped cartilage. Now what will happen? As we know that trachea is the windpipe, right? Trachea is a windpipe. If any foreign particle enters inside the trachea, then what will happen? The lining trachea is lined with the pseudo stratified, or we can say PSCCGE, right? It is lined with the pseudo stratified, right? It is pseudo stratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium, right? Pseudostratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium. Trachea is lined with it, right? The actually when we talk about the histology, so mucosa, submucosa, cartilaginous layer, and the outermost layer is the tunica adventitia. Clear? So when we talk about these cartilaginous rings, these are 16 to 20 cartilaginous rings which are present over the trachea and covers it. Actually these rings prevents the trachea from collapsing back, right? It prevents the trachea from collapsing back. Clear? Now that trachea divided and enters inside the lungs, right? That trachea divide and enters inside the lungs. What will happen? See here, right bronchus, left bronchus. There is a muscular septa, right? There is a muscular septa which is called the diaphragm, and at the base of the lungs is situated over the surface of the diaphragm, right? Right lung is larger than the left one due to the presence of the cardiac notch in the left lung, right? So now come to the lungs. We are talking about now lungs, right? For lungs we use the word pulmon, right? For lungs the medical terminology used pulmon. Lungs is covered by a membrane, right? Bilayer of peritoneum. It is covered by a bilayer of peritoneum which is called the pleura, It is bilayer of peritoneum actually. So what will happen? Bilayer, that means two layers, right? It covers the lungs. That layer is stuck with the surface of the lung. I just draw it only in one lung, right? You have to just to understand it. And this is the outermost layer. The second layer is the outermost layer. Clear? This is the outermost layer. So pleura is made up of two layers. First one is the visceral innermost layer which is attached with the lung surface. It is called the visceral peritoneum, and the outermost layer is called the parietal peritoneum, right? This one is called the visceral peritoneum, This is called the parietal, that is periphery. Peritoneum, or we can say the pleura. Actually, the better can say the pleura, right? Visceral pleura or the parietal pleura. And in between both of them, the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura, there is a cavity is present which is called the pleural cavity, which is called the pleural cavity. And that cavity is filled with the fluid, right? This is the fluid. That cavity is filled with the fluid, and that fluid is known as the pleural fluid. That fluid is known as the pleural fluid. When we talk about the why there is necessary, the pleural fluid is necessary to it, because it prevents from entering of any microorganism inside the lungs first. Second, it prevents the collapsing both of them to pleural membranes to each other, right? And it prevents the lungs from shock, right? It prevents the lungs from any shock condition. This is called the pleural fluid. This is called the pleural fluid, right? So in that manner, that lungs, in medical terminology, it is also known as the pulmon, right? It is covered by the pleural membrane, right? In case of any kind of infection, when the infection enters through the pleural cavity, right, pleural fluid, then what will happen? Due to the it prevents the entry of that microorganism inside the lungs. That's why at that time, when the microorganism trying to enter inside the lungs through the pleural fluid, the pleural fluid amount increases abnormally, and that condition is known as the pleurisy, right? That condition is known as the pleurisy. In that condition, even patient is discomfort in case of lying in horizontal position, right? Because when the water amount is increases just in the chest, and when the patient lying that, it creates a pressure over the chest and patient feels discomfort, right? So excessive accumulation. What is pleurisy? That is excessive accumulation of pleural fluid, right? Excessive accumulation of the pleural fluid is known as the pleurisy. Now what will happen? In that case, the patient suffers from the dyspnea. The patient suffers from the dyspnea, right? What is dyspnea? Dyspnea, that means the difficulty. That means the difficulty, right? So what is dyspnea? That is difficulty in breathing. Difficulty in breathing is called dyspnea, right? Difficulty in breathing is called the dyspnea. So this is and due to the increase of that condition, just because we know that this is called the cardiac notch, right? This is called the cardiac notch. This dome shaped structure is known as the diaphragm, right? Right lung is divided into 3 lobes, and left lung is divided into 2 lobes, right? That is the upper lobe, middle lobe, and the lower lobe. That is upper lobe in left lung, lower lobe in left lung, right? That is left lung, right lung, right? Now what will happen? When trachea enters inside the lungs, it divides into the branches again, right? It divides into the branches again, and form a bronchial tree, right? It forms a bronchial tree, and further it divides and forms a respiratory tree also, right? It forms a bronchial tree and the respiratory tree as well. How we'll see it, right? You can see the branching, and what will happen at the terminal portion, right? In the terminal portion of the these bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, a vascularized bag like structure is present here, at which the gaseous exchange is possible. That's why these vascularized bag like structures called the alveoli. It's a pocket like structure, alveoli, chamber, right? These are the alveoli, and just because the gaseous exchange occurs at this surface, it is called the respiratory surface, right? Now what will happen? The trachea is lined with these cartilaginous rings. It is called the hyaline cartilage, right? And these cartilaginous rings are also present in the bronchial trees, but they are absent in the respiratory tree. These are the question of pre-medical, right? These are the question of pre-medical. If these tracheal rings are present at the respiratory surface also, then what will happen? The gaseous exchange will not be possible in that case, right? So that's why these are the differences between the bronchial tree and the respiratory tree. This is the larynx, right? Trachea, tracheal rings, right? Alveoli. The space between these two lungs, this space is known as the mediastinal space, right? It is called the mediastinal space. Why it is called the mediastinal space? Because it is present in the middle part of the sternum, right? That portion is called the that is middle part of the sternum, right? And at that mediastinal space, the cardiac notch is present and heart is situated here, right? Heart is situated here. Actually that cardiac notch, in that cardiac notch heart is lies, right? And when we talk about the this is the also called the hilum, where where the structures enter inside the lungs and out of the lungs, right? Now in lungs, these alveoli, we know that about the pulmonary arteries, right? Pulmonary arteries, it carries the deoxygenated blood, right? It carries the deoxygenated blood, because when we talk about the definition of artery, the exact definition of artery, it's not which carry the oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. No, the vessel which carry the blood towards the heart, that is called artery, and the vessel which carry the blood away from the heart, it is called the vein, right? So that pulmonary artery exception, it is exceptional case actually. All the arteries carries the oxygenated blood except the pulmonary arteries and the umbilical artery, right? Both of these carries the deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary vein, carries oxygenated blood, right? Now the question is, what will happen when the gaseous exchange occurs at the surface of alveoli? So due to the air, it may be harmful for the alveoli, but there is no damage or no rupturing of the alveolar surface due to the air, right? Why? Because In lungs, it's highly vascularized structures called the alveoli, right, which is covered with a large number of, its surface is covered with the large or huge amount of the blood vessels, right. Which form a joint network with the arteries and capillaries, right. So capillary bed is formed by it. So what will happen? It is vascularized bag like structure which is called the alveoli, right, which is called the alveoli, right. In lungs, there is Clara cells are present, right. Clara cells are present, which is also known as the pneumocyte type 2 cells, right. And these cells secretes the phospholipid, right. These cells secretes the phospholipid lecithin. These cells secretes the phospholipid lecithin, and that phospholipid lecithin is acts as a surfactant, right. It acts as a surfactant for the lung surface, and it prevents the surface from rupturing or from damaging, right. Now what will happen when we talk about this alveoli, right, because gaseous exchange occurs at its surface, internal surface, that's why its internal surface is also known as the respiratory surface. Its internal surface is also known as the respiratory surface. Total number of alveoli in both the lungs is about 300 million. 300 million, right. 300 million alveoli is present in the lungs. Clear? So these are the internal structures of the respiratory system, which is necessary to understand the processes, right. Clear? In short, actually now what will happen? Come to the steps which are involved in the respiration. There are some steps, and one more thing, right? Wait. When we talk about, this is the alveoli, right, and one more important structure is there, that is the diaphragm, right. Diaphragm, when we talk about that diaphragm, its normal shape is the dome shaped, right. Its normal shape is the dome shaped. Clear? Is just like that, dome shape. Due to the presence of that diaphragm, we can breathe easily. We can breathe easily. If that diaphragm gets damaged, that is the question of pre-medical. If the diaphragm gets punctured, then what will happen? Breathing can be fatal, right? Because breathing is not possible, because lungs do not have their own muscles, right. Lungs do not have their own muscles, and they are situated, the base of the lungs is situated over the diaphragm. So by the movement of diaphragm only the inhalation and exhalation is possible, right. And to complete these processes with diaphragm, some external structure is also help with the to the diaphragm, that is the external intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles with the sternum and the ribs, right. There is a question of pre-medical also. Now what will happen when we talk about the thoracic chamber? First we'll complete that, right? Diaphragm, for the diaphragm a medical terminology is used that is called the frena or the phrenic, right? So the muscles are called the phrenic muscles, the blood supply, the blood vessels is called the phrenic arteries, the veins is called the phrenic veins, right? Its normal shape is dome shaped. When it is in contracted shape, then it gets flat. When it is in normal shape or relaxed state, then it is dome shaped, right? Relaxed state, and it's not like that flat, but yes, almost flat, right? So at the time of inspiration, or we can say at the time of contraction, at the time of inspiration or at the time of contraction, right? So this is all about this is the diaphragm. So memorize that point. If the diaphragm get punctured, we will die, because our lungs has our lungs do not have their own muscles, right? So we can breathe just due to the presence of the diaphragm, that is the muscular septa, right? One more question is asked through that, the about the thoracic chamber, or we can say the thoracic cage is formed by, right? To correlate it with your body, from ventral surface or anterior portion, it is formed by the sternum. Ventrally it is formed by the sternum. From lateral surface, right, it is formed by the ribs, and dorsal surface, vertebral column, right? So you can see sternum, manubrium sternum, mediasternum, xiphisternum, right? These ribs are attached with the margin or sternal margin of the sternum, or we can say costal margin of the sternum. Costa word is used for the ribs. And from posterior side or backward portion or the dorsal side, these ribs are attached with the vertebrae, right? These are attached with the vertebrae. So in that manner will form the thoracic cage, right? Will form the thoracic cage. Clear? So this is all about the thoracic cage, the diaphragm, which is responsible for the movement. Now the costal muscles are also help in the ribs, in the movement, breathing movements, right? Costal. Clear? Now what will happen? There are some steps which are involved in the respiration. This is the question of pre-medical, right? And also given in the NCERT, steps of respiration, and on the basis of that we solve the questions, right? What will happen? First one is the breathing or the pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in, right? That means first is atmospheric air drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out, right? Second is diffusion of gases, that is oxygen and the carbon dioxide across the alveolar membrane. The third one is the transportation of gases by blood, right? Fourth one is the, after the transportation, what will happen? That is the diffusion of oxygen and the carbon dioxide between the blood and the tissues, right? And the last is the utilization of oxygen by the cells for their catabolic reactions, right? And resultant release of the carbon dioxide. So these are the steps which are also given in NCERT, right? So what kind of question asked from that portion, right? To arrange the steps in sequence, right? Or they can change us out or in some words here or here and there, right? And ask just which statement is correct or incorrect, right? So that's why these steps, memorize it, just correlated with your body. Obviously by the breathing you can inhale and exhale the air, na, right? So inhale the oxygen due to the concentration gradient and the exhale the carbon dioxide due to the concentration gradient. What will happen after that? The diffusion of gases, that is carbon dioxide and oxygen across the alveolar membrane, that is the gaseous exchange. Now what will happen? Then gaseous exchange is completed, then transportation of gases by the blood, right? And what will happen? Diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood and the tissues, right? Utilization of oxygen by the cells for the catabolic reaction and release of the oxygen, right? So all these are the steps of the respiration.